Denver, Colorado. The click of polished shoes against marble echoed through the vast corridors of Whitaker Holdings. Logan Whitaker adjusted the cuff of his navy blazer with theatrical impatience as the elevator climbed to the top floor. He didn't know why his father insisted on these dramatic summons. Douglas could have just sent another stiff-lipped lawyer with threats veiled in civility. But this time it was different. There was a weight to the summons, a finality that gnawed at him during the ride up. Douglas Whitaker's office hadn't changed in years. The same sweeping view of downtown Denver, the same oversized desk of gleaming dark walnut, the same leather-bound books arranged as if no one dared touch them. The only thing warmer than the lighting was the fire roaring silently behind the glass of the wall-mounted gas fireplace. It might have felt regal to anyone else. To Logan it was a mausoleum. His father didn't rise when he walked in. He rarely did. Douglas simply folded his hands and waited for Logan to sit, a gesture more command than courtesy. Logan took the seat across from him and exhaled through his nose, already bored. The silence between them stretched until the ticking of the antique clock became unbearable. "I'm done cleaning up after you," Douglas finally said, not even raising his voice. "The overdoses, the settlements, the PR nightmares. I'm through." Logan rolled his eyes, slouching back in the chair. "You made your fortune bulldozing people's homes and bribing city planners, but I'm the disgrace?" Douglas's gaze sharpened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "This isn't a debate. It's a condition." He pulled a thick manila folder from a drawer and slid it across the desk. "Inside you'll find the updated trust documentation. In short, your inheritance is now conditional." Logan didn't touch the folder. "What kind of condition?" "You have to be married. For 1 full year. To a woman of my choosing." The words landed like a slap. Logan sat up, stunned. "You're joking." "I'm not." "You're out of your mind." Douglas didn't blink. "There's a precedent. The clause has been in place since you turned 21. Buried in the fine print. I activated it last week." The heat behind Logan's eyes intensified. He wanted to laugh, scream, throw the folder across the room. "You can't do this." "I just did. This is insane." "Who the hell is she? Some country club daughter desperate for a last name?" Douglas's expression didn't change. "Grace Harper. She owns and operates a cattle ranch near Missoula, Montana." The silence that followed was thunderous. Logan blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. "Hey, what?" "A rancher," Douglas repeated. "No socialite. No actress. No heiress. She works for a living. She doesn't care about your name or your tantrums." Logan's mouth went dry. "What? Why her?" "Because she said yes." That stopped him cold. "Wait, she agreed to this?" Douglas didn't answer right away. He simply stood, walked to the tall window and looked out over the Denver skyline. "I've spent a lifetime building an empire. I won't hand it to someone who treats responsibility like a joke." "You want the money? The company? Then prove you can live without it. 1 year. 1 marriage. No escape clauses. And if I say no? Then you walk out of this office with nothing but your name and a pair of cufflinks." 2 days later, Logan stood on the edge of a gravel road miles from anywhere, his boots coated in dust and his patience long gone. A rickety truck had dropped him off an hour late and left him without even a goodbye. Montana looked nothing like his penthouse in Cherry Creek. It smelled like grass, manure, and wood smoke. The wind cut through his tailored coat, reminding him how ill-equipped he was for this part of the country. Ahead stood the farmhouse, 2 stories peeling white paint, a porch sagging under its own age. Chickens clucked somewhere out of sight. A dog barked once and then went silent. The screen door creaked open and a woman stepped out. She wasn't what he expected. Not plain, not flashy, just striking in her simplicity. Faded jeans, a canvas work shirt, sleeves rolled past the elbow. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes scanned him like he was a coyote nosing around her henhouse. "You Logan?" she asked. Not welcoming. Not unkind. Just tired. He nodded, swallowing back the dozen insults bubbling in his throat. "Yeah. Figures," she muttered and disappeared back inside without another word. Logan stood there, stunned. No greeting. No handshake. No sympathy. Just a door left open behind her, like an invitation to hell. As he stepped into the house, something in his chest shifted. This wasn't a test. It was war. Anne Grace Harper wasn't a pawn in Douglas's scheme. She was something else entirely. What he didn't know yet. But he intended to find out. The wind in Montana didn't whisper, it slapped. Within the first week, Logan's manicured hands blistered, his back ached, and the soles of his overpriced boots were cracked and slick with mud. The air reeked of hay, sweat, and manure. Grace didn't say much beyond instructions, and the local ranch hands treated him like a joke that had run too long. They called him Denver behind his back and sometimes right to his face, half mocking, half pitying as he fumbled with bales, dropped tools, or staggered under the weight of buckets too full for his untested arms. Mornings began before dawn. Grace knocked once on his door and moved on, expecting him to keep up. She was already out at the barn by the time he stumbled into the cold, usually halfway through feeding or mending something that looked like it had needed mending for years. She never asked for help, but she never turned it away either. Logan followed, dragging his weight like a man condemned, enduring every sneer from the workers and every unimpressed glance from Grace as if he could will the days to pass faster. She was good at everything. Too good. She moved through chores like someone who had never done anything else. When the cattle auction came, Logan watched her negotiate with men twice her age and 10 times louder, walking away with a deal so sharp it left them muttering under their breath. At night, she made notes by hand, numbers scribbled across yellow paper, figures that meant nothing to him but clearly meant something to her. Logan didn't ask. She didn't offer. The house wasn't any warmer than the barn. Grace occupied the space like a shadow, present but distant. She cooked simple food, usually silent unless giving instructions or answering direct questions with the least number of words possible. Logan tried once to start a real conversation over dinner. She didn't even look up from her plate. After that he stopped trying. But it wasn't just her silence that gnawed at him. It was the feeling that something was being withheld. The place had layers he couldn't read. There were sheds on the edge of the property, padlocked and dust-covered. A rusted mailbox filled with unopened letters, some so old the ink had run. A burn barrel behind the barn still held the blackened edges of paper not fully turned to ash. Once, he saw her toss a stack of envelopes into it without reading them. He didn't ask. Then there were the people in town. He went in twice, once for hardware, once because Grace sent him for grain. Each time, a few older locals nodded too slowly, squinting at him as if trying to match his face with something long forgotten. At the grain store, a woman behind the counter paused when she saw him. "You back already?" she asked, but not with warmth. He told her she must be mistaken. She didn't argue. Just rang him up and said, "Places remember even when people don't." Back at the ranch, Logan tried to bury the unease beneath exhaustion. Grace kept piling work on him, fixing fence lines, cleaning troughs, hauling feed. One morning, she sent him to latch the north gate before moving the cattle. It seemed simple enough. But by afternoon, half the herd had pushed through and wandered down into the creek bed. It took hours to round them up. Grace said nothing while they worked. Nothing when he apologized. But her silence afterward was different. Cold in a new way. Controlled rage. That night she didn't eat dinner with him. Just handed him a plate and went outside. He sat alone in the kitchen watching the fields darken, his jaw tight with humiliation. Somehow that silence struck deeper than any insult. He didn't understand her, and worse, he didn't understand this place. But something in him was beginning to crack. Not from resentment but from something that felt dangerously close to respect. He watched her the next morning as she wrangled a stubborn calf, speaking in low tones, steady hands calming the animal with a confidence that didn't need an audience. There was no performance. No pretense. It was the opposite of everything he'd known in Denver. And it made him feel hollow. As the days wore on, he noticed Grace watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Measuring him. Assessing. But never letting him get close. Once, in the tool shed, he found an old photograph stuck behind a row of dusty jars. It was of a child sitting on a porch, the frame tilted, sun blurring half the image. Something about the pose, the way the boy sat cross-legged, barefoot, grinning crookedly, pricked at Logan's memory. But when he tried to bring it up that evening, the picture vanished. He started keeping his questions to himself. Something about this land whispered things just out of reach. He couldn't put it into words, but the soil under his feet felt familiar in a way that made no sense. And the locals weren't helping. "You're not a stranger here," one ranch hand muttered one afternoon while fixing a broken fence post. "You just forgot." Logan didn't answer. But later, alone in the barn, he stared at the dirt floor for a long time, wondering what it meant to forget a place before ever knowing it. The first cracks of thunder rolled in just after dusk, low and distant like the growl of something ancient waking beneath the hills. Logan stood on the porch, arms folded tight against the chill, watching the sky churn into shades of bruise and slate. By the time Grace appeared beside him, the wind had already picked up, sending leaves skittering across the yard like nervous birds. Neither of them spoke. There wasn't time. She was already pulling on her jacket, barking instructions over the wind as lightning splintered across the horizon. The rain hit fast and hard, a wall of water that soaked them to the bone within minutes. The lower pasture flooded almost immediately, the drainage trenches clogged with debris from a long summer gone dry. The cattle were panicked, pushing against the fences trying to escape the rising water. Grace sprinted ahead without hesitation, her flashlight cutting narrow slices through the darkness. Logan followed, slipping in the mud, boots sinking deep as the ground turned to sludge beneath him. They worked through the night, side by side, no longer adversaries but soldiers in the same losing battle. Grace moved with relentless urgency, shouting above the wind, her hands raw and trembling as she cut ropes, unlatched gates, and calmed skittish livestock with a quiet intensity that defied the chaos. Logan hauled feed, lifted sodden hay bales, and tried not to think about the cold water creeping up his legs. His muscles screamed with every motion, but he didn't stop. He didn't want to stop. By the time they reached the final paddock, the water was nearly waist-deep in places. Logan waded through it with numb feet, guiding the last few animals to the higher ground near the barn. Grace was waiting there, soaked and muddy, hair plastered to her forehead. Her eyes found his in the dark, and for a moment, neither moved. Inside the barn, the storm roared overhead like a freight train, rattling the beams and hammering the tin roof. The animals were restless, hooves clattering against the floor, the air thick with heat and fear. Logan leaned against a wooden post, catching his breath, his clothes heavy with water, every inch of him aching. Grace sat on a hay bale nearby, wringing out her sleeves in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than the storm. "I didn't want this." Logan looked over, confused. "The ranch? No. This arrangement. The marriage. The contract. Whatever your father called it." Her words landed heavy in the dark. Logan didn't respond, just watched her hands as they twisted the fabric of her cuff. She continued, her voice low but steady. "I inherited this place after my father died. But there were conditions. Legal ones. Things I didn't understand at the time. Your father showed up with offers, promises to help. Said there was a way to save the land. I thought I had no choice." Logan leaned forward, the storm momentarily forgotten. "You didn't choose this either?" She shook her head, rain still dripping from her collar. "No one chooses chains. Even gold ones." Something shifted in Logan's chest then, a slow, grinding turn like a rusted key in a lock. For weeks he'd assumed she was part of the game, another pawn in Douglas's long line of manipulation. But now, sitting there in the dark, soaked and exhausted, she looked more like a prisoner than a partner. "I think I've been here before," he said suddenly, the words surprising even himself. Grace looked up. "I don't know when. I was young. Maybe 6 or 7. I keep remembering a smell, wood smoke, dust, the sound of wind through the rafters. It's like déjà vu but stronger." She studied him for a long moment but didn't speak. Later, after the animals calmed and the rain began to fade, Logan wandered into the old office near the back of the house. The drawer stuck when he tried to open it, but a sharp tug revealed a tangle of papers, receipts, faded maps, and a photograph yellowed with age. It showed a man in a weathered hat, standing beside a porch with a small boy on his shoulders. The boy's smile was lopsided, the way Logan's had been in every childhood photo. The man was unmistakable. It was the same face Logan had seen hanging above the fireplace, Grace's father. He turned the photo over. A scrawled date and a name, Logan, summer '94. He didn't sleep that night. In the early hours of the morning, as the first blue hints of dawn crept in, Logan stepped into the kitchen where Grace was drying her hair near the stove. They didn't speak at first. The storm had drained them both, but something in the quiet had shifted. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. When he leaned in, it wasn't desperate, it was searching. The kiss was soft, almost unsure but real. For a second she let it happen. Then she pulled back, her eyes clouded with something unreadable. She turned away, mumbling something about chores, and was gone before he could say anything more. The kitchen felt colder after she left. Not from the storm, but from the way something had opened between them and immediately shut again. Logan stood there for a long time, the photo still in his pocket, the taste of something unfinished lingering in the air. The phone rang mid-morning, its shrill tones slicing through the quiet of the house like a blade. Logan had been outside clearing fallen branches from the storm, his mind still tangled in the memory of that photo. When he heard the ring, something inside him clenched. Only one person called the landline. And sure enough, when he picked up, Douglas's voice greeted him with the same clipped control it always carried. "You've had your fun, Douglas said, as if the past 2 months had been some extended vacation. Now it's time to come home. Logan stayed silent, watching the sun move across the kitchen tiles. I've cleared the way, Douglas continued. Your old position's waiting. Better, actually. A direct line to VP. Full control over the new Denver development. All yours, on one condition. Logan didn't ask. He already knew. You leave the farm. You walk away from Grace Harper and that dusty wreck of a ranch. No loose ends. No apologies. Just pack up and come back where you belong. Logan's throat tightened. Douglas said it so easily, like he was asking him to cancel a subscription, not abandon an entire life. Logan mumbled something non-committal and hung up before his father could press further. The rest of the day passed in a daze. Grace kept her distance as she had since the storm, speaking only when necessary and keeping her eyes averted. Logan didn't push. He had questions, but they weren't ready to land yet. Not until he sorted the storm inside his own head. That evening, when Grace sat at the edge of the porch sorting receipts, Logan joined her. The sky was pink and gold, the kind of Montana sunset that turned everything into soft fire. He watched her for a long moment before breaking the silence. My father called. She didn't look up. Let me guess. He wants you back. Logan nodded. He's offering me everything. All I have to do is walk away from you. Grace's hands froze over the stack of papers. She didn't ask what he planned to do. Maybe she already knew. I need to ask you something, Logan said carefully. When you said you met him before I got here, what did you mean? Grace sighed, folding the papers too neatly. He came to the ranch a year after my father died. Said he had a business proposition. Offered to help with the debt if I signed some documents. Said he wanted to protect what my father built. And you believed him? She hesitated, then shook her head. I was desperate. The bank was circling. I didn't have many options. Logan stood, restless now, and walked to the edge of the porch. The wind had picked up again, dry and restless like his thoughts. That night, after Grace went to bed, he returned to the office and began digging. Something about the way she had said sign some documents didn't sit right. She hadn't told him everything. He searched through drawers, files, boxes long left untouched. In a folder marked with faded ink, he found a set of transfer deeds and property agreements. One page stood out, a document showing that Douglas Whitaker had purchased the ranch 6 months before Grace officially inherited it. Not from her father, but from a silent party listed under initials only. The name Grace's father was listed on the document, but in the signature line, the handwriting was unmistakably Douglas's. Something didn't add up. When Logan confronted Grace the next morning, she didn't deny it. But she tried to deflect, said it was complicated, that she hadn't meant to lie, only to delay. When he pressed harder, she finally looked him in the eye with a weariness that went beyond exhaustion. You were here before, she said softly. When you were a child. With your mother. The words hit like a thunderclap. Logan stared at her, the pieces suddenly floating too fast to catch. My mother? He asked, barely recognizing his own voice. Grace nodded. She used to come here, often. Your father didn't know. She wanted a place away from everything. From him. My father let her stay in the guest house. Said she was running from something. Logan's heart pounded. He didn't remember any of it, not clearly. Just flashes like heat lightning. The porch, the trees, the smell of wood smoke. A woman's laugh in the kitchen. His mother had vanished when he was 7. Douglas always said she left. No details. No closure. You think he had something to do with it? Logan asked, though he already knew the answer was yes. I don't know what happened, Grace said quietly. Only that one day she was here. And then she wasn't. My father stopped talking about it. And your father showed up not long after. Logan turned away, the nausea rising fast. The storm outside had passed, but another one had just begun inside him. His entire life, his memories, his family, even this land, suddenly felt like a lie built brick by a man who called it love. He walked out into the field and kept walking, the Montana wind pulling at his jacket. Grace's voice echoed behind him, calling his name, but he didn't turn back. Not yet. The courthouse in Missoula smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of place where truths weren't shouted but quietly filed away. Logan stood in the records room, the overhead lights flickering weakly above him. His fingers moved through the brittle manila folders like a man looking for a name that no longer existed. He requested every document tied to the ranch, ownership transfers, estate filings, tax records. He combed through decades of paperwork, chasing shadows. His mother's name, Margaret Whitaker, wasn't there. Not once. Not in the land transactions, not in the leases, not even in visitor logs from the years she had supposedly vanished. It was as if she had never existed in this place. And yet she had. Grace's eyes didn't lie. That photo didn't lie. But the paper did. Logan left the courthouse with a dull rage pulsing behind his ribs. He drove back to Denver without calling ahead, the miles dissolving under his tires as he replayed every hollow memory of his childhood. The silence at the dinner table. The stories that never added up. The nights his father avoided questions like they were grenades. He arrived at the Whitaker building just before closing. The receptionist tried to stop him, but one sharp look sent her scurrying. He found Douglas in his office, the skyline of the city sprawling behind him like a kingdom laid bare. Logan didn't sit. He dropped the folder of forged transfers and missing names on the desk like a verdict. Douglas didn't flinch. He looked at the file, then up at his son with that same tired disdain. "So you finally found it." Logan didn't speak. He waited. Douglas sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Your mother was unhappy. She wanted space. She found it on that ranch." He paused as if trying to decide how much of the truth to offer. "I let her go for a while. Thought she'd come back. But she didn't." "She died there, didn't she?" Logan's voice was low but sharp. Douglas nodded slowly. "There was an accident. No police report. Her heart gave out, they said. Grace's father called me. Told me she was gone. I went there. I made sure everything disappeared." "You buried her memory like she was an inconvenience," Logan said, every syllable shaking. "She left us, Logan," Douglas snapped, the mask cracking. "She ran. She chose that place over her own family. What was I supposed to do? Let her name stain everything I'd built?" Logan stared at his father, the man who had shaped every corner of his world through silence and control. The man who had erased his mother because she didn't fit his legacy. Something inside him hardened and broke in the same breath. "I'm done," Logan said. "With you. With the company. With all of it." Douglas stood, anger rising. "Don't be a fool. That ranch won't last. Grace used you." Logan shook his head. "No. She protected me. You used her." He left without another word, the city lights behind him fading like the last embers of a fire that never gave off warmth. Back at the ranch, the fields were quiet again. The animals stirred in the distance, the sky heavy with the scent of late summer. Grace stood by the barn when he returned, her expression unreadable. She didn't ask where he'd gone. She already knew. They sat on the porch as the light faded, the wind brushing the tall grass like fingers through memory. Logan didn't need to explain. Grace spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of what had never been said. "My father was afraid," she said. "He didn't trust Douglas. But he also didn't want a war. So he stayed quiet. I stayed quiet." Logan nodded, the silence between them different now, less about avoidance, more about reverence. "This land remembers what we try to forget," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan looked out over the fields, the fences, the barn that still stood despite all it had seen. "Then maybe it's time we remember too." The moon rose slowly, casting silver light across the porch. In the stillness, Logan felt something he had never known in Denver. Belonging. Not the kind that came from wealth or legacy, but the kind etched into the soil by grief and growth. The farm wasn't a sentence, it was a sanctuary. A place that had held the truth when no one else would. He reached for Grace's hand, and this time she didn't pull away. They sat in the quiet, not as two people forced together by someone else's design, but as two survivors who had finally found the place they were meant to be. The past no longer needed to be hidden. It had roots here. And so did they. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. Subscribe to the channel, like us, and be sure to write in the comments what you think of this story. Don't forget to click on the bell, so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.